The wind howled through the vast African savanna, carrying with it the echoes of distant roars and the faint elusive scent of something new, something unknown. Under a crimson sky painted with streaks of gold and purple, two golden figures moved stealthily through the tall, dry grass, one strong and imposing, his mane rippling slightly in the breeze, the other graceful but visibly weary, her steps careful and deliberate. Their amber eyes flickered with a mixture of determination and fear, glinting like twin flames against the fading light. They were running from a past that could no longer sustain them, running toward a future they could not yet see, their paws pressing into the cracked earth with every uncertain stride. But what lay ahead? Salvation or a new nightmare? The question hung in the air unanswered as the horizon stretched endlessly before them. This is the story of Tao and Luma, a pair of wild lions who braved the harshest of trials in search of survival. They were not merely wanderers, they were survivors, bound by a bond forged through years of shared hunts and quiet nights beneath the stars. Their journey was more than just a migration. It was a desperate fight against time, against the unrelenting forces of nature, and against the unknown perils that would either save them or break them forever. The savanna, once their kingdom, had turned its back on them, and now they were adrift, chasing whispers of hope carried on the wind. For years, Tao and Luma had ruled their small domain, a patch of land where the grasses swayed tall and the prey roamed plentifully. They had hunted side by side, their movements synchronized, their trust unshaken. Tao, with his broad shoulders and commanding presence, had been the protector, his deep roars a warning to any who dared challenge their reign. Luma, lithe and swift, had been the strategist, her keen senses guiding them through the rhythms of the wild. But the land had changed. The waterholes, once shimmering pools of life, had dried into cracked, barren pits. The herds of antelope and zebra had vanished, driven away by drought or hunted to scarcity by rival predators. The once thriving savanna had become a battlefield of survival, where every day was a struggle against thirst, hunger, and the encroaching shadows of death. The day they left, the air was thick with tension, the sun blazing mercilessly above them, casting harsh shadows across the parched ground. Each step forward was a step into the unknown, the familiar landmarks of their territory fading behind them. Tao led the way, his head held high despite the gnawing emptiness in his belly, while Luma followed, her golden fur dulled by dust and fatigue. At night, Tao stood guard, his muscles tense beneath his scarred hide, his ears pricked at every distant rustle, the snap of a twig, the low growl of a hyena, the faint cry of a lost creature. Luma, exhausted, tried to rest, curling her body into the grass, but the hunger clawed at her ribs, and the fear of the darkness ahead kept her amber eyes half open, staring into the void. They crossed endless plains, their paws sinking into the brittle earth, dodging the cackling packs of hyenas that trailed them, their eerie laughter a constant reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond sight. Rogue lions, solitary and territorial, eyed them as intruders, their snarls echoing through the night, forcing Tao to bare his teeth and roar in defiance. Each night was a gamble, each day a battle against exhaustion. The sun beat down relentlessly, sapping their strength, while the coolness of the night brought little relief, only the ever-present threat of predators drawn by their vulnerability. But something inside Luma was different, a subtle shift that Tao began to notice as the days stretched into weeks. It was a weight that was not just fatigue but life. Her pace slowed, her breaths grew labored, and she moved with a protective instinct that Tao recognized instinctively. She was carrying something more than just hope. She was carrying a future, a fragile promise nestled within her. Tao's gaze softened as he watched her, his fierce protectiveness deepening, though he could not fully comprehend the miracle unfolding beside him. After weeks of endless travel, their tongues parched and their bodies gaunt, a faint scent reached their noses. Fresh water. It was a whisper of salvation, cutting through the dust and despair. And with it came the promise of life, a lure they could not resist. The towering fences of Kalahari National Park loomed ahead, their metal glinting ominously under the sun, a stark contrast to the wild, untamed lands they had known. Tao and Luma paused, sniffing the air, their senses assaulted by something unfamiliar. The sharp, metallic tang of man mingled with the earthy richness of the reserve. Patrol vehicles rumbled in the distance, their engines a low growl that set Tao's hackles rising. But hunger and thirst pushed them forward, overriding their wariness, drawing them toward the unknown. Unbeknownst to them, two sets of human eyes had already locked onto their presence. Jaden, a seasoned ranger with weathered hands and a quiet intensity, gripped his binoculars tightly, his heart pounding as he studied the two rogue lions near the reserve's border. Beside him, Amara, a wildlife observer with a notebook clutched in her hands, scribbled furiously, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. "They don't belong to any pride here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the wind. "They've come from far away. Look at their condition." Jaden nodded grimly, his jaw tightening as he took in the sight of the lion's matted fur and hollow flanks. As Tao and Luma cautiously explored the edges of this strange new territory, their every movement was watched, tracked by the humans who patrolled these lands. The grass here was greener, the air cooler, and the faint trickle of water called to them like a siren's song. But something soon became apparent to Amara as she observed Luma more closely. The lioness was struggling. Her belly was swollen. Her movements slower and more deliberate than Tao's, her breath shallow and uneven. "She's pregnant," Amara said, her voice filled with both wonder and concern as she lowered her binoculars. Jaden's expression darkened, lines creasing his forehead. A pregnant lioness, exhausted from a long journey and on the brink of collapse, could mean disaster, not just for her, but for the fragile balance of the reserve. Days passed, and the lions settled uneasily into their new surroundings, their instincts warring with their desperation. Luma's condition worsened with each passing hour, her strength fading as the life within her grew more insistent. The contractions began one humid afternoon, subtle at first, then intensifying into waves of pain that left her panting in the grass. Tao paced nearby, his usual composure shattered, his massive frame trembling with restless energy. The labor stretched into endless hours, then into 2 days of unrelenting agony. Luma paced, moaned, her body shuddering with exhaustion, her golden fur slick with sweat. Tao, usually fierce and unshakable, was a storm of distress, circling her protectively, his roars splitting the air as if to ward off the invisible threat stealing her strength. Amara and Jaden watched from a distance, their binoculars fogging with their anxious breaths. They knew intervention was risky. Sedating a lioness in such a fragile state could be fatal for her and the cub she carried, but doing nothing meant she might not survive the ordeal. The night was still, the stars obscured by a heavy blanket of clouds, when a deep guttural roar shattered the silence, Tao's warning, fierce and primal, reverberating through the trees. The humans approached slowly, their boots crunching, softly on the dry earth, their hands steady but their hearts racing. Jaden whispered, his voice tight, "If we get too close, he'll strike. He's on edge." Amara stepped forward, her movements deliberate, her voice calm yet firm as she spoke into the tense air. "We're here to help." Tao's golden eyes locked onto hers, piercing and wild, his growl rumbling deep in his chest. He did not charge, though his muscles coiled as if ready to spring. For a moment, time seemed to hang suspended, the night holding its breath. Then a silent understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement fragile but real. With careful hands, Amara knelt beside Luma, her fingers trembling slightly as she whispered soothing words into the still night. She administered a small injection, enough to ease the birth, to dull the pain, but not enough to sap Luma's fading strength. Then they stepped back, retreating into the shadows, watching, waiting, their breaths shallow with hope and fear. The minutes stretched into hours, each one an eternity. Luma's body tensed, her claws digging into the earth, her chest heaving with effort. And then a cry. A tiny, fragile cry pierced the silence, high and quavering, a sound so small yet so profound it seemed to shift the very air. A cub, small and golden, wriggled against the grass, its damp fur catching the faint moonlight that broke through the clouds. Tao moved forward hesitantly, his massive head lowering to sniff this new life, his breath warm against its tiny form. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he licked the cub, a tender gesture that marked its arrival into their world. Luma, exhausted beyond measure, let out a deep, shuddering sigh, her amber eyes shimmering with relief and something deeper, pride perhaps, or love. She had done it. Against all odds, she had brought life into this harsh, unforgiving world. Amara and Jaden exhaled in unison, their hands shaking with the rush of adrenaline and awe. "She made it," Amara whispered, her voice breaking as she wiped sweat from her brow, barely, believing the miracle they had witnessed. Jaden nodded, his stoic facade cracking into a rare, faint smile. They named the cub Neo, a name meaning new beginning, a tribute to the hope it represented. Days passed, and Tao, Luma, and Neo began to explore their new home, under the watchful eyes of their human protectors. The reserve was vast, its rolling hills and shaded groves a stark contrast to the desolate plains they had fled. Tao no longer growled at the sight of Jaden's patrol car as it rumbled past, its dust trail swirling in the wind. Instead, he would simply glance at it, his gaze steady and calm, then return to his silent duty of watching over his family. Luma grew stronger with each passing day, her ribs less prominent as she fed on the prey that thrived within the park's borders. Neo, small but spirited, stumbled after her, his tiny roars more comical than commanding, his curiosity boundless. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, the patrol car slowed near a grassy slope. There, standing tall against the setting sun, was Tao, his mane catching the last rays of light, giving him an almost regal air. Beside him, Luma nuzzled Neo, who clumsily batted at her tail, his playful antics drawing a low, affectionate rumble from her throat. And for a brief moment, Tao turned his head, locking eyes with Amara and Jaden through the car's dusty windshield. No growl, no warning, just a look, a steady, unflinching gaze that carried a weight beyond words. A silent thank you, perhaps, or simply an acknowledgement of the strange alliance that had saved them. As the car drove away, its engine fading into the twilight, Amara wiped away a tear, a deep warmth filling her chest, a quiet joy she couldn't quite name. Jaden, his hand steady on the wheel, simply smiled, a rare, unguarded expression. "This," he murmured, his voice soft but certain, "is why we do what we do. Moments like this, when the wild lets you in, just for a second." The story of Tao, Luma, and Neo spread quietly among the rangers and researchers of Kalahari National Park, growing into a legend whispered over campfires and scribbled into logbooks, a testament to survival, to trust, and to the unbreakable bond between the wild and those who seek to protect it. Months turned into years, and still, every time the patrol car passed through those lands, 3 golden figures could be glimpsed among the grasses or atop a sun-warmed ridge, watching, not out of fear, but perhaps out of gratitude. Tao, with his weathered strength, Luma with her quiet resilience, and Neo, now growing into a young lion with his parents' fire in his eyes. Because sometimes, even in the wild, the greatest strength comes from understanding, from a moment of connection that transcends species, that binds the untamed heart of the savanna to the hands that guard it. And in that understanding, a new story begins, one that echoes across the wild lands forever. Wildlife conservation efforts. African Wildlife Reserves, thank you, my friend, for taking the time to follow the story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to support us.